Welcome to MellyS The Story Collector Web TV, where each week we bring you inspiring stories from courageous individuals about the moments and experiences that have shaped their lives. In this episode, we get to talk with the beautiful Linda, who shares with us how trauma affected her life, but also put her on the path to helping others heal their trauma.
I guess what I'd like to share is about taking that imperfect action. And even if it's scary, even if it's a bit messy, just to take the action instead of, you don't want to be on your deathbed thinking, I wish I'd done that, I guess that's why.
Yeah. And there's so many people who hold themselves back because of that perfectionism.
Yes. And it's not a helpful thing often.
No. It just puts you into a really bad state where you're constantly going over and over the same thing because it's not good enough. Yep.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So what story would you like to share with us around this imperfection?
So recently I launched The Truth About Trauma TV, which is a video channel on YouTube. And I'm naturally an introvert, although some people who know me might think that's not quite right. But I am really quite introverted. I could go and sit quietly for weeks on end and, not talk to anybody. That would be okay with me. But I've had this calling to actually do my part in the world to eliminate all unnecessary trauma. Because I'm a trauma therapist and it's just come out of my work in my clinic. And I could, as an introvert, sit in my business and hide away and just see one client at a time. And I could do that, but I have this real drive within me to make a difference in the world. And I think it can be changed simply through education and training. And all these little things come up in my mind about, there's big organisations that do this work, you don't need to do this work. All this sort of stuff comes up. So I battle these little inner voices that challenge me stepping out and sharing with the world what I have to share. So I have to keep coming back to that point that I do have something to offer and that it might be the piece that means something to that one person or 100 people or whatever number of people.
Exactly. And it's certain people resonate with other people. So there's going to be people who are drawn to you who are not necessarily drawn to like the larger companies.
That's right, yes. And I guess I stand in a place of, and it's taken me a long time to get here, of having the lived experience of my trauma, my own trauma, going through my own trauma recovery, and then being able to use the story without being angry, blaming, or, just not settled within myself around, what happened. So I feel that having that story of my child being diagnosed with cancer when she was 6 months old, then losing her sight at 3 from that disease, the treatment of the disease. But my experiences in the medical system, and I didn't know at the time, but they were actually traumatising experiences that were unnecessary. And the same through the education system. I didn't know at the time, but they kept touching on my trauma or triggering my trauma, and I didn't know it. And, now that I can see that, I want to be able to educate people that are in these fields that are creating this trauma without knowing it and giving them the tools to be able to do that differently for the people that they service or they provide a service to, as well as themselves, because it's through their own trauma and their own inability to face often what they're seeing day in and day out that provokes the behaviour that is trauma causing or trauma triggering.
And what sort of behaviours would they exhibit then if they are being triggered from a trauma?
Well, one of the stories that I use is around when my daughter was first diagnosed. We had to go to the kids hospital in Camperdown in Sydney, and she had to have this test where they put a dye in her system, and then she had to have this scan to see where the cancer had actually gone in her body. And my husband and I were looking at a screen. We were sort of a distance away from her. She screamed the whole time, red-faced, this 6.5-month-old, 7-month-old baby on this great big long cold metal table, strapped down. Horrific, really. That in itself is horrific.
Yeah, that would have been horrible, especially at that age. Yeah.
so little. And, you know, I couldn't get to her. Like, my milk was letting down. I couldn't do anything. And she's screaming and I'm feeling horrible and everything like that. It was just one of those horrible, horrible experiences you wouldn't wish on anyone. And there was a nurse on either side of her. And my husband and I were looking at this, like a TV monitor thing, and it showed her, like, her body, and it had all these little white dots all through her body. And I just turned to my husband and said, oh, my God, it's all through her. So we're standing there trying to make meaning of this thing, but we're not medical people. We wouldn't have a clue. So that's what I thought, but it wasn't the case. That wasn't what was happening. But that's where we were left, you know, on our own, and to assume that this is what's going on. And then the nurses were on either side of her, and they were talking about their weekend. And if there was ever a time in my life where I was going to hit someone, it was that day. I just wanted to go over and just punch him. Because, here's my little 7-month-old screaming, like, you know, that red face screaming. Yep. And she did it for the whole time that she was tied up there. And the nurses are talking about their weekend. But what I see now happening is that they're totally disconnected and shut down. And if I think about it now, from this place that I am now, having to do that job where they see so many little children suffering, I can get how they do that. So what it says to me is that they don't actually have the support they need to be able to be present with the suffering that they witness day in and day out. So that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about, where people need to look after themselves so they don't get vicarious trauma from witnessing trauma regularly.
And it would come up quite a lot for them in their job, and after a while they would just have to disconnect because the pain of dealing with this multiple times would just pile up on them.
But it's interesting, you know, because I remember when we first went in, I was sitting there, and I know it's the flight response now that I was experienced. I was sitting outside the oncology ward at the kids' hospital, and I said to my husband, what's oncology? Look, even though I knew she had cancer and all of it, it just didn't click. Like, your brain, when you've got trauma brain, things just don't go in. And anyway, we're just going, we don't even know what it is anyway. And this nurse came through the ward doors, red hair, really white skin, big red lipstick, and this beaming smile. And it sort of didn't equate with the situation that I was in, because all I wanted to do was just take my baby and run. I didn't know where I was going. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. And she came over and she sat next to me. I'll never forget her name. Her name was Chrissy. And I'll never forget how she looked. And she just gave me a big hug. And in that, I just knew that I would be okay, that I could do this. I had it covered. So it's like, I have an experience like that, and I have probably a handful of those type of experiences where people seem to have a different way of coping and they can be present. But I have many, many more of, like, the nurses, you know, standing on either side talking about their weekend and just totally disconnected from what they're doing. So there's something in some people that have the resilience or the ability to be present but not take it on, and people who don't feel supported and don't know what else to do except shut down.
That hit me hard, just thinking of that nurse sitting there and just hugging, knowing that she can't do anything else. Like, that's huge.
Yeah, and that's all it took. It took that for me, because her nervous system, I know now, her nervous system was calm and my nervous system regulated to hers. So that's what actually happened in that process. And that gave me then the strength to know I can take the next step. I can do this. I've got it in me. I can do this.
Yeah. And imagine if every single person that you met during that process had that same response for you, you would have felt so much more at ease the whole way through.
Yes, absolutely. And it would have been less traumatizing than it was. But, you know, that I guess without that experience, I wouldn't be sitting here today acknowledging that and having this calling to make things different in the world, just through letting people know that there are different ways of being with people who are in trauma. Yeah? You have to recognise your own trauma first, because, you know, trauma is a part of living this life. We can't avoid it. It's what we do with it, and are we supported enough so it's not a problem in our lives.
So may I ask what happened with your daughter then?
Yes, she was totally blind by the time she was 3, but she's an adult now, and she's done horse training. She's represented Australia in a sport called goalball, which is for blind and vision impaired people. She's done lots and lots of things, but definitely has her struggles, particularly around finding gainful employment. It seems like it's very difficult to get that opportunity as a visually impaired person to be able to work and have a career that's been, without being the token disabled person in the, office, that's what she's really looked for and hasn't been able to find.
That's interesting, because you think that society is so inclusive of those that don't have the same abilities, but if you're blind, how are you meant to operate a computer? How are you meant to do your job?
She can do all of that. She can do all that. She's got speech. She can do all that. She's quite capable.
Yeah.
It's just that she hasn't been able to find that gainful employment. I think we've set up a little bit around focusing on the lack of ability rather than the skills that people with disabilities have. I think it's round the wrong way.
Yes. That's actually a big point.
Yes, and we also feel what we found is that, people like to do things for people who've got disabilities and things like that. So it creates this bigger than, smaller than type scenario where the person who's doing the great thing, which is good, but it doesn't allow the person with disability to be on equal standing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense what I've said?
So really it would just take the simple, do you need help with that? And leaving it at that. Yeah.
Or acknowledging what that person already has, their own wisdom and their own skills. And I would not be able to do what she does if I couldn't see. I'm sure of it. I would want to sit in a corner and rock, fair income, because it would be horrible to lose my sight. Yeah. So, and I've tried playing the sport that she's played, and I have to cheat. I say, I have to cheat. I can't find the ball. It's like, I wasn't good at it.
So has that trauma then from when she was 6 months old come up through her life?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And the whole family. Like that can't not have such a significant impact. And because I was traumatized as a mother, I wasn't available to my child either, or my other children properly. So it's like that has its own flow-on effect. So until I was able to acknowledge that I had this trauma, I knew what to do with it, I wasn't able to, be fully available and support my kids through their trauma. But once I did my own trauma work, then I'm able to, but they're adults, I've missed that opportunity when they're young, but still through, the grandchildren and, adult children, I can still do that work.
So that's why you are so passionate then about helping others understand this.
Absolutely. And it really is exciting for me when young people deal with their traumas. And also I do this work called systemic constellation work, and it's about generationally what's passed down through the generations. And we also have like collective cultural trauma in all of us. So we don't even look at those types of things, how that might be in our way. So, it's very interesting when you open it up to that bigger field and look at other ways that you might be impacted in the way that you are in the world and how you can heal that.
That's a really good point, that generational trauma that's passed down, and just that feeling that there's something wrong, but you've never experienced anything in your own lifetime.
That's right, where you carry for the system. So however it's showing up, whether it's dysfunctional or not dysfunctional, however it's showing up, it's like, what does that do? The question I ask is, what does that do for that system? And then what's the healing path for that system?
Interesting. I like it. That could be a whole other video. I love it.
It's great work. It really is amazing. And so many deep insights come from that work. I love it. Yes.
Oh, we'll talk again about that soon, very soon. Now, the final question I always like to ask is, what does courage mean to you? Because you've been through a lot through your own journey. So where did courage really pop up for you, and what does it mean for you now?
So I think I've always recognised, even as a younger child, that I was quite spiritual, and that doesn't mean that I was hooked into any particular dogma. But I found that was very important to me, and even sitting in nature or sitting down the bottom paddock with all the horses and the goats, that is really nourishing to my soul. So finding those things where, apart from like alcohol and cigarettes, which is what I used to do, because that's what I know and that's very generational in my family. So when I learned that I didn't need that, I had other resources, then I was able to hook into those resources. But it's about, I don't know, there's always been this knowing. I never had to ask why me. It was more like, why not me? So it's like, I know that there's a bigger picture. I've always had that sort of in me. And I guess the courage to do it comes from the connection to that spirituality. So I don't feel like I'm on my own.